discussion with Liz Anderson, Alan Gibbard, Jim Joyce, and Peter relatively absent here. And the session will be chaired by Daniel. So take it away, Daniel.
Okay, so this idea came when we realized that we just had like one thing on the last day, and we thought we should have two.
That's not a joke. That's exactly how it happened. Oh, sorry.
There's also
I'm sure we can fulfill that.
But there is a more serious point to this, which is that it's always seemed to me, and I think Zoe would agree with this, that Michigan is such a distinctive place philosophically. It's distinctive in terms of the personalities who have been here and who are here. And we figured that for the first alumni conference, we hope of many, many more, that it would be good to hear from people who sort of have experienced different versions of Michigan, who are sort of at the core of what Michigan is. And so we reached out to them, and they very generously agreed to do this with, I apologize, very little guidance. But the reason that there was very little guidance was because we wanted to leave it to you, what you think is important about Michigan, what's compelling about Michigan, what's distinctive, anything you want to say. So with that in mind, Peter Railton I also asked, and he very, very generously sent us some prepared remarks. So Zoe is going to read them for us.
All right. Hello, my name is Peter Railton, and I am present at this conference. Warmest greetings to all. I very much wish I could be there with you to celebrate the department and the wonderful philosophers who have emerged from it and will be emerging from it in the years to come. I thank Zoe and Daniel for taking the initiative and doing so much work to make this event possible. And I'd like to thank Holly and Karen and Nate and Connie and Nishi, former students who do us great honor in traveling to Ann Arbor to take part. And of course, Uma, Caroline, Lingxi, Zoe, and Daniel, current students who rose to the challenge of providing comments on the talks. For Liz, Alan, and Jim, I don't have the words to say thanks for all that you've done over the years to make this department such an exciting and collegial place to be. In our former colleague Scott Shapiro's 2011 book, Legality, he writes of the Michigan Philosophy Department that it is, quote, that rare place on earth where brilliance and decency go hand in hand. And Peter clarifies that's on page 449. In my time at Michigan, I've had many colleagues who embody these ideals, but none I think more perfectly than Liz, Alan, and Jim. And I'm very sorry not to be able to hear their remarks today. For myself, Peter Railton, I simply want to say that I've never been prouder than I am today to be a member of the Michigan department. The faculty and students here are showing more than ever that dedication to teaching, diversity, and doing philosophy that matters, that are integral parts of brilliance and decency. I see the next generations in the department as leading the way forward in the very old, very demanding, but always renewing and rewarding discipline of philosophy.
So, whichever order you guys would like.
I'd like to go first because I'm going to go back to the beginning of the university. So I just want to say, this is my 30th year at University of Michigan. Came here in 1987. Peter, I think probably is at his 40th, roughly. I think he's about 10 years.
He came the year after I did, so 78, I think.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
First partly in the Society of Fellows and part in the full department.
So I thought it would be worth reflecting on why I've stayed here for so long. I have received, in the course of my career, offers from other places and many, many feelers, and I've always said no. And why? Well, I found that the atmosphere, the intellectual climate at the University of Michigan has been absolutely ideal for the style of work that I do. Because it's not just the philosophy department, but in fact the whole university, that it has historically been incredibly open to interdisciplinary thought, to learning from colleagues in other departments and indeed other schools. And this has characterized my own career here. I've taught in the law school. I taught global justice jointly with an economist. I taught a graduate seminar jointly with a sociologist here. I have been involved historically in reading groups that cut across multiple disciplines and engage graduate students and faculty from multiple disciplines, including history and political science and so forth. So, and this is a place where the departments and even the schools are not siloed in their self-contained areas, but genuinely open to each other, and that, for me, has been the ideal place. And so I wanted to bring us back to why maybe Michigan is like that. And so I'm going to start with some words with which you ought to be extremely familiar. Okay? It says, religion, morality, and knowledge, being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. I'm sure you've noticed this because you've passed under those words hundreds or even thousands of times. And then you might reflect, well, what on earth? For one thing, like, what's that religion thing doing there? We're a public university? Like, isn't there something about the Establishment Clause? And then, okay, so where do those words come from? Well, in fact, they're a direct quote from the Northwest Ordinance of 1789, which was a law passed prior to the adoption of the United States Constitution under the Articles of Confederation that did two very important things. One is they prohibited slavery in the Northwest Territories, which included all of Michigan. And the other thing they did was provide for the establishment of public universities. So University of Michigan was actually chartered under the authority of the Northwest Ordinance in 1817, and this year we are celebrating the 200th anniversary of U of M. Yay! Okay, so now I'm going to bring up our tale to Angel. So that's our building. We're in Angel Hall. And who's this Angel guy? Well, this is James Angel, the president of U of M from 1871 to 1909. And Angel had an ambition for University of Michigan. He was going to turn this backwater university in the boondocks into a world-class research university. That was his ambition, and as you know, it ultimately succeeded. Well, what was his strategy for achieving this objective? Goal number one. I shall tell you, I am not the John Dewey professor for nothing. He hired John Dewey. He hired some other distinguished people. But Dewey was one of his great achievements. He hired Dewey in 1884, and Dewey spent the first 10 years of his philosophical career here at University of Michigan. So it's worth thinking about Dewey's intellectual influences and how that, I think, affected the character of the university. So one thing you should know about Dewey's intellectual career was that he was raised, of course, as a Christian, as everybody was in those days, and educated in a conventional Christian school. But what really fired him up was Darwin. and the theory of evolution. And he rapidly saw that if you took this seriously, you couldn't really take the Bible literally. And so while he was at U of M, although he was still a Christian and even taught courses in Bible study, one of his students remarked at the time, he evidently claimed to be a Christian, but he was certainly the most liberal one I had ever met. Now, what this meant, Dewey had a very clear idea of what this meant. And throughout his whole career, Dewey saw that the complete domination of American higher education by the churches was inimical to the progress of higher education. And because they engaged in preaching and not teaching, right? You had these dogmas in the Bible, and they're just passed down to the next generation. And his goal, which was inspired by evolutionary theory and by psychology, the emerging science of psychology, was instead of teaching fixed dogmas from the past, to teach students methods of inquiry so that they could forge future paths and discover new knowledge that hadn't just already been like written down somewhere. And that's the basic idea of a modern research university. And so Dewey then thought that for philosophy to make progress in inquiry, it did have to engage other disciplines. So if you look at some of the courses he taught, they included courses in, these are the course titles, empirical psychology, special topics in psychology, psychology and philosophy. So what we see here is right from the very birth of University of Michigan as a research institution, one of the greatest philosophers who I think deeply shaped not just the philosophy department, but indeed the entire intellectual tradition that U of M continues to this day. He saw very clearly that progress in inquiry requires a cooperation of the disciplines, and I think that tradition has helped inform some of the distinctive features of philosophy at U of M. Friendliness to naturalistic approaches, taking very seriously moral psychology, empirical work in all the social sciences, and not least, great respect also for learning from the history of philosophy and relearning that. So we have a wonderful tradition also of studying the history of philosophy, recovering perhaps lost lessons that had once been learned and lost, and recovering that for reuse and reconfiguration, which I think is also an important feature, especially of ethics at U of M.
Well, I didn't prepare anything, but I think we can continue the story. So, Bill Frankena was with his wife on this, spending a year in Europe, the year of sabbatical, or retirement furlough, as it then was when I arrived, and Bill had been a graduate student here after being coming from a very strongly Calvinist Orthodox family and going to Calvin College. Bill when Yale fired Stevenson for having a immoral theory, his colleagues saw the opportunities and got Stevenson to come here. And then I was, like Liz, I was an undergraduate at Swarthmore, but when I was at Swarthmore, the department was very much Richard Brandt's making. I think Brandt had gotten to Swarthmore about 1940. He was from a strongly Christian background, and his work had been on Schleiermacher, whom I don't know much about, and even though he'd spent at least a year at Cambridge, I don't know if he was an analytic philosopher when he got to Swarthmore, but he certainly became one. And when I didn't have direct dealings with him until my senior year, but then I took the Swarthmore system was, if you were in the honors program, you took 2 seminars per term, and I took his moral philosophy seminar as a senior, and it was a really thrilling experience. Well, Franken and Stevenson got Brandt to come a year after I graduated in 1964, and I visited Brandt every so often. I was very disappointed when I went to look for a job, and he didn't seem to have any interest in me. But then I got a call saying Stevenson has decided to retire, and so we'd like you to come to campus, so that I always say that I came in Stevenson's budget line, and immediately my philosophical ideas began to change. But when I was at Pitt, and that was a wonderful department, and I had a very hard time figuring out where I wanted to be, and it was partly a two-body question, and partly a question: do I want to grow up in a university-centered community or a sort of broader community? What Brandt did was have a dinner with guests from a number of departments, including Michael Oxenberg from political science, who's been at Swarthmore as a little ahead of me as an undergraduate. Very importantly, Dick Nisbet and Susan, I'm not sure who the other one was, but his idea was to make it vivid to me what that the big contrast, or a big contrast between Pitt and Michigan was that Michigan was situated in a major university and had as Liz was saying, had resources from top resources and a wide array of fields. Well, when I got here, I think 4 other members of the department had Swarthmore background. So Larry Sklar had his first job was at Swarthmore. Jaegwon Kim's first job was at Swarthmore, and he taught me symbolic logic. And then John Bennett, who I didn't know it when I was at Swarthmore had any philosophical interests. I knew him when I was a senior and he was a freshman, but I knew that he was marvelous at singing Don Ottavio and other Mozart tenor parts. But Michigan, of course, lived up to the promise that Liz has been talking about of being a wonderful place for all sorts of connections. So the first term I was here, Steve Stitch and Dick Nisbet and in psychology did a joint seminar on philosophy of psychology, and I remember at that time, I mean, Michigan could have been even greater at that time. The Michigan ambition was to hire what they called the Jerusalem Four, and Amos and Barbara Tversky and Danny Kahneman and Dan Treisman, well, that didn't work out, but Michigan still has always had a marvelous psychology department, which we philosophers have been privileged to deal with. There are other departments that we've been privileged to deal with, and I remember going over for a drink at Steve Stitch's house after the first session, and he was talking about getting the Jerusalem Four, and I asked, who's Amos Tversky, and Dick Nisbet said, he's the greatest philosopher in the, or sorry, greatest psychologist in the world. And then later I heard Dick described that way. And then my second year, Steve Stitch had unfortunately left, but Dick Nisbet and Al Goldman did a seminar, and that was, of course, thrilling too. So when I came, I was doing a lot of work in social choice theory, so I got a lot of chance to talk with economists here, economic theorists especially, and I began to learn. I'm pretty oblivious to public opinion, but at times I got hints that Michigan was regarded as sort of weird and oddball in philosophy, and that we were interested in things outside academic philosophy. And I thought that was a terrific thing. And when we've done graduate admissions, I've very much thought, well, we shouldn't require people to be philosophy undergraduate majors. We want people who know something outside academic philosophy, and I think we've done well on that point. So it's a thrill now to see people who were brilliant graduate students and are now brilliant, mature philosophers. So I've taught everybody in this group except Holly, and she was my colleague for a few years. That was marvelous. I forget whether I taught you in any courses, Jim, but I knew. But I certainly knew you as the best. I think the best grader I ever had. And then you went away for a while and came back with this marvelous dissertation. I was on the committee for that. And Dan was wonderful to have around. And he and Justin Darms would come in and talk with me about things that were very central to my issues. I mean, there are a few other people here are Michigan PhDs, but I mean, it's really a thrill to see that our department can't, of course, take the major credit for the wonderful people who have been talking with us, but I hope it gets some of the credit. And it's been a thrill to teach or be a colleague of all these people at earlier stages in their philosophy career, and I think sort of broad conception of philosophy has become much more prominent in the world than it was when people regarded it as an oddball quirk of the department, and that's very gratifying. How much of that is Michigan's influence, I don't know, but it's certainly the place I came to partly for that, and it's been very gratifying to have. So I thank all you people.
So I came in 1980 as like a graduate student, and I'll sort of start there and talk about the departments that I have known. I sort of divided up into three. The department was very different at that time, and the graduate program was very, very different. I ended up coming to Michigan because my advisor, I went to a small school, my advisor had heard of Ellen Gibbard and had heard of a few people at Michigan who actually at the time weren't there. This was before sort of the lighter report. So yeah, and so I ended up sort of coming to Michigan actually thinking that I think that Brandt and Frankeno were still here. My advisor thought that Al Goldman and Holly Goldman were still here. They weren't. They just left. And there were all these people like Kit Fine, who my advisor had never heard of. So anyway, I arrived in a class of 11, 2 women, which made our class very special because usually it was 0. The program was very sort of different then. You taught from day one. It was kind of expected that, about half of the people weren't going to make it, which was true in my class. And I have the sense that the difference, that sort of the distance between the faculty and the students was much greater then. So sort of to take an example, our offices were actually at the far end of the hall, down where sort of classics is. And so it had kind of a different feel. So, I mean, at that time, Jaegwon Kim was chair, and I think Jaegwon Kim was chair. Louis Loeb was here. Louis retired from the department. But Alan was here, Larry was here, Ken was here. Peter Railton had kind of just arrived. David Velleman had just arrived. So that's kind of the department that I came into. That department stayed fairly stable, more or less, throughout my graduate career. Kit Fine left, Steve Darwell came, which was huge because that sort of gave us this kind of presence in ethics, which, it's added to our presence in ethics, I think.
Well, we had the great 3 before
right.
I was here,
right?
I kept saying, well, we can't expect that we'll be able to rebuild in the same field of strength. And somehow we were able to.
Yeah. So anyway, I did sort of my graduate work here. It was a prelim system, so it was much less sort of course based, and I think one of the major differences is we didn't have any sort of money over the summer, so we had to work. So, that was a common issue. But then, as Ellen mentioned, I went away to Washington, and I wrote a dissertation there. And I went in the job market, and I applied, and it was a sort of pretty good year on the job market. Like, I bet there were 100 more jobs available than there were this last year, or something like that. And so I had a good year, and I was coming home from a job interview, a job that I was pretty sure they were going to offer me, and I was pretty sure that I was going to take. And my wife had picked me up at the Washington airport. We were driving across the bridge, and she said, Louis Loeb called. He wants you to come to Michigan to give a talk. And I found that very puzzling. because I couldn't figure out why they would want me to come and give a talk. But anyway, it turned out to be like a job talk. And I took the job with some trepidation, frankly, because I was a student here. I wasn't really sure what it would be like. A lot of people told me, a lot of people at other places in particular told me that would be a terrible idea to go there. But it was a great job. I knew it was sort of a great department, so I came. And I have to say, and thanks to Ellen on this, and thanks to Liz. Liz had.
I was there. I vividly remember your job talk. It was like totally awesome.
I vividly remember it too, but that was not my internal picture. But I've always been very sort of grateful to the department that I came and I was treated from day one like a member of the faculty, and it was so I never felt. I never felt sort of the least bit like people told me I would feel coming back to the department that I did my graduate work in. But anyway, I get here, and this begins the second period, as I think of it, and this is the period of change. From about, I don't know, I'm trying to think when it started. Sort of at one point, fairly close together, Gideon Rosen left, and Steve Yalvo and Sally Haslinger left. And that, I think, began this kind of a period where it really felt like, there were some of you who were here then, where the department really felt kind of unstable. And it didn't help, coming back to Brian Leiter, in those days Brian used to put speculations up on his website. And there was a period, I believe, for 5 years in a row, when it was on the Leiter report that Alan was going to leave. And that in the event that he did, we would drop 4 places in the rankings. And what's interesting about this place, and I just find this one of the great things about Michigan, is I think largely because of the sort of the core cadre of people who sort of stayed through the whole thing, right? Even though it was a revolving door, right? We were able to somehow find people to replace the people who were leaving, who were of fantastic philosophical quality, and also, and I think this is what we've done, incredibly well. Also, people who, are great colleagues, great teachers. And I'm not sure why we've been able to do this so much. I have a sort of a hypothesis that this isn't the kind of place that sort of prima donnas want to stay. So if you're only concerned about your career, a big public institution may not be the right place for you. So people sort of move on. But that period, I think, was so challenging in various